evening, everyone, and welcome to Greenlight Bookstore. We are so excited to be hosting tonight's event with Akil Kumarasamy presenting her new book, Meet Us by the Roaring Sea. Woo! She will be talking tonight with Ly Tran, so you are in for an excellent evening. Before I turn things over to them, just a few housekeeping things. If you could turn off or silence your cell phones so they don't go off tonight, that would be great. We do also ask that masks are worn the whole time you're in the store, unless you were up here on stage talking. And most importantly, we have signed books for sale tonight. Both Akil and Ly's books are signed and for sale at the registers. And if you ask really nicely after the event, they may even personalize it for you. But now on to the good stuff. Our interviewer for this evening is Ly Tran. Ly graduated from Columbia University with a degree in creative writing and linguistics. She has received fellowships from McDowell, Art Omi, and Yaddo. House of Sticks is her first book. She will be speaking tonight with our featured author, Akil Kumarasamy. Akil is the author of the linked story collection Half Gods, which was named New York Times Editor's Choice, was awarded the Bard Fiction Prize and the Story Prize Spotlight Award. Her work has appeared in Harper's Magazine, American Short Fiction, Bomb, and other publications. She is an assistant professor in the Rutgers University Newark MFA program. Her new book, Meet Us by the Roaring Sea, is a remarkable genre-bending exploration of memory, technology, friendship, love, consciousness, and the costs of caring for others in an age when we are so often lost in the swamp of our own minds. So, you're in for something really special tonight. Akil will be reading from the book, then Ly will join her in conversation, and you'll have your chance to ask them questions after that. So please, join me in welcoming to the stage, Akil Kumarasamy and Ly Tran.
Thanks everyone for coming. It's like so good to see everyone like in physical human form, and it's just like in like one space. So I feel like I haven't seen a bunch of people like, in the pandemic. So it feels like nice to just like in this kind of like cozy space to see everyone. So thank you so much for coming. Yeah, so I'm just going to read I guess a small excerpt from the book. It's kind of hard to know where to read from the book. So I just picked some place in the middle. So I think all you really need to know, so basically it takes place in the near future, and a young woman is translating a text. And so I'm going to read a part that takes place in the near future. And she usually works in an AI consulting firm, so this is just talking about her past work. At college, you worked at a suicide prevention center. It looked pretty bleak, with linoleum floors and fluorescent light that jaundiced your skin. On your team, there was grumpy, dopey, bashful, sleepy, and happy. The names didn't fit. You were nicknamed Sleepy because you mostly did night shifts and slept in the day. Your face didn't show it, and you sustained yourself with frequent naps during the week. The building was old, in the early 2000s. A labyrinth of cubicles that let everyone squirrel away. The conversations were recorded and the phones were outdated, so you didn't have the option to video call. Some people would request to see a friendly face before they died. Mostly the callers were lonely. One graduate student hadn't spoken to a single live human for over a month, and she was suspicious that you were an automated robot. "Prove you're human," she said. And you recited poetry, told her about your day and coursework. "That can all be programmed," she said. "Show me that you're really human." It was your first week and you wanted to transfer her to someone else, but you needed this job and didn't want to seem inept. Probably because of your nerves, you just started hiccuping and apologizing. "I'm sorry." And when the line went silent, you murmured, "Please be alive still," dispensing an emotional entreaty which went against protocol. But then, from the pits of a whale's belly, she emerged. Thank you. You weren't too sure if all the expulsions and stammering of your body made you any more human. She hung up, and you hoped that that was not the end for her. There were no follow-ups. Your old coworker, the fifth dwarf, Happy, was fired after working at the center for 2 years. They deactivated his ID and didn't even let him collect his belongings. Everything was shipped to him. In an afternoon conference, the oversight board, which consisted of a woman in her 80s with a hearing aid and a fresh graduate with an eye patch, played the recordings referred to as the love chats. Over the course of a week of mandatory retraining, you listened to the 10-hour conversation between your coworker Happy and the young man caller number 347 he was falling in love with. Caller number 347, or David, said he planned to die that night. He had tidied his things and called his mother, but she didn't respond, so he thought he would call her before he ended it all. His words were careful and slow, like he was standing on the ledge of his voice. Happy stayed calm throughout the first half hour. He asked David about himself and the people in his life. Then, somewhere around the 45-minute marker, there was a shift. David described an incident when he was 8. He had tried to drown himself by sticking his head into a toilet bowl. And in the middle of the story, Happy's voice cracked as he said, "Oh no, you poor thing." And he began laughing. And David said he was supposed to save him and not ridicule him. "Why do you keep thinking you're shit, sweetie?" Happy asked. And David returned the question, "Why do you keep listening to this shit?" Then they kept repeating shit to each other like it was the loveliest word. Happy was known for using endearments that some might be deemed overly affectionate. It was his style, but even Happy knew he could stray only so far from protocol. Around 87 minutes in, he snapped out of it, remembered he was in his cubicle and David was teetering over some black hole. "Can I call you tomorrow?" David asked, and Happy said, "Yes, please." That was how it started. He called at the same time, and Happy made sure he was at the phone. It went on like that for over a week until the oversight board stepped in. David's number kept coming up in the logbook. A frequent caller was always tagged. The pair of administrators paused the recording at certain sections to make sure everyone understood the breach in protocol. "Your voice was in my dreams last night. Were you trying to make it shut up? It helped me sleep. I bored you that much? Not in the least." Mr. iPad stopped the recording and wrote on the board, "Flirting," and then crossed it out. "Think of how many people who would help because of this," he said. "You need to be aware." It was like that for the rest of the retraining. As much as you wanted to block the administrators out, you wondered if they possessed a keener sense, beyond hearing or sight, that you couldn't access. Even Happy didn't seem to know he was in love when they dismissed him. And it almost felt unethical to dissect feelings that someone didn't realize they possessed. Maybe nothing would have come of those feelings. You always knew the conversations were recorded and no longer belonged to you. And maybe that was true for everything. All your actions, words, purchases. The day after Happy was fired, David called and asked to talk to Happy. When they said Happy no longer worked at the center, David asked for a personal phone number, which they refused to give him. He hung up, never called back. You wonder if, after all this, he felt like dying out of love.
Thank you so much, Akil. Hi. Full disclosure. Did I just turn this off? Hello? Is it glowing? No, it's not glowing.
It's not loud. We'll get you a new one.
Yeah. I'm a pretty loud person, so it's okay. So full disclosure, Akil and I are dear friends. And yeah, it's not only is she a dear friend of mine, but it's someone I deeply admire. And I'm just so honored to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much for this exquisite gift. You know, one thing that I noticed about Akil when I first met her is that there's this really deep undercurrent of kindness. And when I was reading this book, radical compassion is a theme that comes up again and again. So my question to you is, you know, how did this idea of radical compassion come about? what inspired you to write this?
Yeah. Thanks, Lee, for being here with me. Yeah, I think for like a question I was sort of grappling with is this question of like how do we care for other people and what is like the border between the self and someone else? Like for example, like compassion. Someone could like if you're standing in like in the subway and someone jumped into the tracks and then someone jumped after them trying to rescue them. And if the person like lives, people are like, oh my gosh, you're amazing, you're a hero, you're so compassionate. And then if the person died, they would be like, oh, you're crazy, you're delirious, and why did you jump in and try to save someone? So I was kind of interested in like that border of where that border lies of caring for someone and trying to like kind of going beyond the self. And also where's that border where it's like you kind of like it's like too much, or like it's like you also are kind of like consumed by something and it's like that delirium. So where's that border? And also just like how do we care for people like so far? There's so much like the world is sort of on fire, and like how do we care for others like far away, close by in our communities? And I think with the pandemic, where I was also writing the book, during the pandemic, and all those questions felt even like more like resonant. Like how do we connect with others? Like the pandemic really showed us like how like interconnected we really are. So how do we? So what does it mean to really care for someone and take that kind of like take that leap, or just kind of be more porous to other people's suffering? Like yeah. So those were questions that just became like even more like pressing in my mind as I was writing the book more.
Well, what's really interesting is even as you're talking about, what inspired you, all the ideas that sort of culminated in this book, you're using the first person plural, and also the second person.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the most immediately striking features of this book is the structure, a book within a book, and the perspectives that you employ. There's this intricate dance between these two perspectives that you masterfully choreograph. And so I was just wondering what led you to make these choices, especially because they really defy a lot of literary convention.
Yeah, I know. Like also, like the second person can be polarizing, and then you have like, the second person with the first person plural together, and that's maybe kind of strange. And I think because like a lot of this book is trying to, it's like people who are sort of that feel kind of outside their own bodies, and also are kind of trying to go beyond the ego. So both like the collective we kind of channels this kind of collective consciousness. And then the second person was like someone who's also grieving, someone who just lost their mother. And like I think that there's like a feeling of grief that you feel kind of like outside your body, and you're trying to find a way back into this person you used to be, or just like what does it mean to be back into your body? So it's like someone searching to be back. And also the you also felt like I think for like the whole like I think for like the past 3 years I was writing a lot of things in the second person, because looking back I wrote like 3 short stories and they were all in the second person. And I think the second person just like inhabits that kind of like that strange like liminal space between like it's like it almost feels like first person, but then it also has some distance. And it also kind of like interacts with the reader, because the you feels like you're speaking to the reader, and it's also maybe even like you are the person, like you are the narrator, like speaking to you directly. So in a way, the book is like a woman translating a text. So she's becoming entangled with the lives of other people, and at the same time, she's I guess wanting to entangle the reader too. So like that you kind of functions on that level too. And that was and I just like love the energy of the you, and also first person plural has a lot of energy to it. So I think those both together, which felt like really resonant to me. Yeah.
That's awesome. And how did that affect how you approach characterization in this book?
It's interesting because like there's something that's kind of like disembodied, something kind of disembodied about it, because also the narrator is kind of unnamed. So that was like kind of a question, like how do we get to know a character that's sort of like that we're kind of circling around, or a character who doesn't really know themselves or struggling to find who they are. So I think a lot of that was also like how they interact with other people, like how their behavior with other people, and then also there's a lot of like also what's not said, the kind of silence, and how like kind of silence like speaks to like what is maybe like what they're kind of struggling with on a deeper level. And for the first person plural, it's sort of like it's a collective voice. So there's not a single person, but 3 characters do emerge in the first person plural. So there's, I think in that sense, you kind of get this kind of like they become this big amalgamation, but at the same time, like it's like dealing with like ideas that 3 individuals come up with about what radical compassion means. So so that was fun thinking about how to make that, like, you know, you might not get a single character all the time, but you're also getting this collective voice, and that kind of is able to show like a bigger picture. Yeah.
That's great. So clearly language is something that is a big part of this book, language and translation. You know, our protagonist is translating a text. And, you know, Jubil Lahiri says that there's no better way to learn how to write than to translate. And in your book, you know, the protagonist happens upon this manuscript and is not only deeply engaged in the act of translation, but her day job is to train this AI how to speak. She's teaching it language. And I also know what you did this summer, so I'm wondering what the role of language and translation plays in your life and what the significance it holds for you. And I want
I was in like the 7-week German language immersion program, so like it was just we were supposed to only speak in German, which we mostly did. I think there's some folks with German still here. So I think I think like the act of translation just feels like it's like a very intimate act, and you get so close into the headspace of someone else. And I think a lot of the book is about sort of kind of like thinking about kind of how do we connect with others so far away. So she's translating a text that's not related to her at all. She's not a normal speaker, and originally she's not. So it's someone who's like identities far away from this text, and also living in a different time period, different geographic location. So it's like very distant from her, but at the same time she's doing this really kind of this deep, like kind of loving act of trying to translate something, but at the same time she knows it's sort of like she's transgressing a bit, because the girls in the manuscript might not want to be translated into English. So that's like a question of kind of thinking about the kind of like dominance of English, thinking about the colonial history of English. So she's doing it anyway. So in some ways, she knows that this is something that they might not want to. So that kind of complicates this kind of relationship with text. And also that's something I was thinking about too. Thinking about we think about the language and which languages are given power, and then how much literature is actually translated. So these are the questions she's also sort of wrestling with in doing this act of translation.
Just like in your own life, the role that language translation has shaped your life. And also I guess I was in this German program, and then we were talking to each other very slowly and like also very metaphorically, because we had such limited vocabulary. So we'd be like, "Oh, my head is like stone." And I was like, "Wow, this is so beautiful." We only use we don't use articles. But yeah, it was just like I think I don't know where I was going with that thought. But yeah, there's something about it, even just I think even just going to a language and not knowing that much, and just you're kind of reacquainting yourself in the process of learning language, and like how it feels like to grapple with a language you don't even know, and it's sort of like being a kid again, and what came so naturally to you as a child is now something you have to do it more consciously. And also just it also sort of defamiliarizes you with your own language. Like even thinking about English, it gives you some space. So like any other language gives you some space away. I think Yoko Tawada often writes in German, and when she writes in German, she thinks about Japan differently. When she writes in Japanese, she's able to see Germany a little differently. And then also it's she also it's sort of also a struggle sometimes for her, and it's like a challenge to move back and forth between those languages. So I think
Yeah, I think it also brings about kind of surprising connections. Yeah.
Yeah. If you happen to talk to Akil tonight, you might be lucky, and she'll have, she's been code switching between German and English, even in conversation with me.
No, but I feel like it just comes out now in like really strange ways. Like I ran out of chocolate yesterday, and I'm just like, my room, just like why? It's like it just comes out like in the weird spaces.
That's great. I love it. So I wanted to talk about AI. The novel has been hailed as genre bending, which is an incredible feat to pull off. And you do it so well. What gave you the idea to experiment with science fiction?
Yeah, I wouldn't say always love science fiction, but it's also I think genre has always been something that's kind of like really attractive to me. It's just like what it allows you to do, what kind of possibilities it allows you. I wrote this article in The Atlantic about W.E.B. Du Bois, and he wrote a romance novel, and like almost 100 years ago. And it's a really strange and unusual book. And it's like a romance. Yeah, and the romance is like everything is unusual. And I think that the book itself, the romance, allowed him just like a lot of possibilities with his fiction. And similarly, I think like different genres just kind of like opens up space for you to kind of think about things that are happening now in a kind of different lens, and it also like allows you just like space just to be kind of imaginatively like expansive and crazy, and also just also you were able to employ different strategies like which you wouldn't normally do. Like even thinking about romance and melodrama or coincidences, like things that just happen that are just quite naturally. It just allows you just to like play around more, and just I think it's really enjoyable. It was really enjoyable to use genre in a way that was like it allows you to invent, and it's really fun.
Yeah. There's all this AI speak in the book. There's like a lot of talk about atomic and subatomic particles, quantum entanglement. What sort of research did you have to do in order to really delve into this genre?
I guess it's like somewhat like piecing together also things from my past too. I used to sometimes like do like programming. My mom's a programmer, and just also this like I read a lot of the books about AI and things that like all kind of interested in like physics and entanglement and so basically, so both like research, but also thinking about how like use the research and trying how can use the research in the space. Because also sometimes you do a lot of research and you're like, what do I include from the research? And there's so much stuff, and you have like pages of like interesting tidbits, and just thinking about like how can I use it in a kind of imaginative way, and also realizing that it's not necessarily going to be exactly like the future world's not going to be exactly like the reality now. So I don't want to just to like amplify what is here at this present moment. Like how do you kind of imagine something a bit like more unusual? So I kind of use the research as a basis. Just like kind of thinking about what is happening now and trying to use that as kind of springboard to think about what will happen, what could happen in the future. Sometimes we often think like we just think of the same things happening in the future, so it's just trying to think like how to kind of break away from that. And but the research part was also very fun. It's also just like led me to unusual places, and even like the book also has like works things with archives. And I was also at the Schomburg Center looking at archives. So I think the book kind of just like led me to like to different places, and I kind of like followed it where it led me.
You talk about the future. The book is interesting because there's our narrator is the narrator's present day is our future, but the near future. And so there's a lot that is familiar to us as readers, but just beyond our grasp. Which at times can make for quite an unsettling read, because it shows the potential of where we could end up, where humanity could end up. Like if not enough is done to curb global warming, for instance, which it's true, not enough is being done to curb global warming, then we could be, the idea of a future in which we have to track our carbon footprints is real. And so I'm just wondering about, the role of time in this book, And I feel like at times it can be very prophetic. So it can be either a cautionary tale or prophetic. So you could discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess it's like, it's a book that takes place in the future, but it's like a lot of it is also dealing with the past, because it's like, someone who's sort of grieving someone's death, so it's kind of like thinking about archives and also trying to piece together her mother's life. At the same time, it's dealing with this like old manuscript. So I feel like the book is also dealing with different like levels of technology. Like you have like the active translation, which might feel like a low technology, and then also you have like carbon score monitoring, which feels like very high tech. So I feel like we're just kind of like a range of technology that like levels of technology that is being used. Yeah, I think I wanted like this sort of like the strange interplay of just like being in the past, being in like this in the past, and also in this place that seems like very different from the future NYC, which is, and then also being in this future NYC. Yeah, I think like I think the fact of even setting it in the future just allowed me to just have space to just see the present world more clearly, and it kind of just felt like this kind of like this experiment box where you could just like you could look back in the past and also just like make sort of connections that might not normally be seen between like places that seem like so far away and so far apart. So I think I found like and also there's something kind of feels like kind of time traveling about the text, because you're jumping from this place that the manuscript is like in the 90s and it's very far away, different landscape, and then you're in this future world. So kind of combining places that seem like they don't really go together, right, in one space. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a particular message that you would like readers to? Yeah. Yeah.
Message.
Yeah. What do you think? Yeah.
I feel like it's hard to say, but I guess it's like I guess like the one big question, I think, the theme about just like how do we become like porous to the how we're apart from the world and we're also vulnerable to it, and like how we're kind of how do you become like more porous to the world, and what's the cost of it? So just like what is that kind of relationship between the two things, and also just like I guess trying to kind of creating a new geography, just trying to see places that seem so far away in relation to each other. I think another big thing is just like there's a lot of televisions in this book, and television is like television is sort of like this portal, like the outside world can come into your home, and and so I'm kind of interested. There's also there's a reality TV show about soldiers, and I'm very interested about thinking about how like how we might consume more, like because we have this reality TV show, like this soldier reality TV show, people are able to see what is happening, but it also has some sort of like numbing effect, just watching it. But it's also this sort of portal, and so like these characters are kind of forced to interact with it on a more deeper level. And also just thinking about now, now where we get so much coverage about about wars, and also just thinking about what wars are not shown, what things do we not see in what's not covered. Just trying to think about that relationship, because like both storylines. So there's like TVs is such a big thing, and I think my interpretation of the cover too is like I feel like these are kind of like TVs sort of maybe. Yeah.
Speaking of the cover,
Yeah.
it's funny because there's a chapter in the book where the protagonist is trying to find a title for the manuscript that she is translating.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you came up with your title.
That's a funny question because I was with you, right? It's so strange for like for my first book, the title. I had the title like the first day, and I was like, oh, I have a title. This book, I got the title in the last day, like it was the last day. They were like, Akil, we need a title, and I was.
I think you missed the deadline actually. Right?
I missed it. I was like, no, 2 more days. I'm okay. And I was actually with Ly, and then we actually like. I was with Ly and our friend Alyssa, and we were in the Santa Clara Mountains. So it was very beautiful. So I'm like, I must be able to find find the title here, the power of the trees, the redwood trees, and what happened. And we made a list of words. Like, what is your book about? We
pulled up like an easel,
started writing words, like draw a picture. And then slowly, like the title got pieced together, like in that weekend. Yeah, and I guess it's I feel like it's a title that kind of it will have like much more meaning when you reach the end of the book. So you have to reach the end.
No spoilers.
And it all makes sense.
Okay, I won't ask you what it means then. What was the most difficult challenge that you faced while working on this novel?
Oh man,
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
Challenges.
This question, right?
I think this book, it deals with like so many different kind of narrative threads. There's like so much happening in this book. And I think normally someone would just tell you just to like just focus on one of those things. Don't focus on all of them. Just like limit your, just like limit on these one or two things. But they all in my mind, they all felt like they were meant to be together. So finding a way to like touch on all, there's a lot of like, plot, like how to balance all the different plot lines. And I think for a while, when I was writing it the first time, like the first draft, maybe second, third draft, I was really just focused on the plot level, just like, okay, make sure you touch on this and A, B, and C, because like readers must know A, B, and C. They might forget about C if they don't talk about A, B, C. So just like, A, B, C, B, C, A, so, trying to just touch on everything. I think I was just like working on a very plot level, and I think it took me some time to realize I could just go like the level below it, kind of like the subconscious level. So it's like kind of like you're filming a movie, and each scene, like you're just like, if you're just filming for plot, you're like, here, this person's here, this person's here, but like what's happening underneath that scene. So just trying to make sure that that book is functioning on that level. So I think that took me a second just to get to that level. And also just trusting the process. The book is very unusual and also emerged in a very unusual way. Like I had no idea. I started with the inner manuscript, not knowing it was the inner manuscript. I just kind of followed like the voice. I started writing in collective first person plural, and I was like, okay, I'm going to follow it where it leads me. And then it just sort of kind of evolved, and just kind of just trusting the uncertainty of the process and being okay with that, not knowing. And I think that was a kind of growing process. And also just, so just being okay with uncertainty and just trying to navigate it.
Yeah. I just want to read aloud this part of this incredible review that Akil received, which also references your first book. Akil Kumarasamy's first book, Half Gods, was a linked story collection revolving around two Tamil brothers. But for all that book's prodigious skill and depth structure, readers of Half Gods will not be prepared for the uncanny brilliance of her first novel, Meet Us by the Roaring Sea. It's a brazenly complex, labyrinthinely structured, deeply philosophical, thematically ambitious novel. A masterpiece that more than confirms the promise of Half Gods. So, really excellent review. So I'm just, I read Half Gods, and I recommend that you also purchase a copy tonight. But it's such an incredible collection. How do you feel that you've grown as a writer since Half Gods?
Yeah, it was like 4 years ago. I think for like Half Gods, it was an intro like story collection. And like for that book, it was also like also a lot of uncertainty. I didn't know like if the stories would like speak to each other, and I think there was a lot more. I think it was like a much more brute force effort. Like I will just punch the page every day, and like something will happen, or like I will keep digging with the spoon, and I'll just make something will happen. I'll get to the other side. Like I think it was a much more a bit more arduous of a process, and just more just like thinking, just trying to make a page. And I think also. For this book, it was just much more intuitive process, and kind of trusting myself, and also letting the story lead me to different places, and being kind of just being okay with that process. And I think also just for this book, I think also after writing Half Gods, I feel like with a story collection, you have to come up with different structures, different things, different styles. So it feels like almost you wrote 10 books. If you wrote 10 stories, you're just like, I just wrote like 10 books. So I'm like you also feel really comfortable in just like switching up point of view, switching up structure. So you feel just like you feel kind of you feel more confident with that. And also, so I just felt like with this book, I could be imaginatively crazy. Like I could go crazy. So with you know.
You went there.
Yeah, I went there. Yeah, I went there. Yeah. I think a level of like a confidence, also playfulness. I think this book was like a lot of fun to write too, and I think that was just it was a pleasure.
Yeah, I think something that struck me about this book, because it's a deeply serious book, but then there are some passages where I found myself chuckling. I'm like, was that intentional, or and now I realize that it is.
Yeah, I think it's also a funny book.
It's funny. So I'm asking for a friend. This friend is not me, but for aspiring novelists, what advice would you give?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, I guess it's also like with life, but just like being okay with uncertainty, like being okay with like not like like sometimes you might just know where your book is going or your story is going for like the next page, the next sentence, and you're not too sure what's going to happen after. So if you could transform that uncertainty into like excitement instead of fear, that would probably open you up to a lot of possibilities in your work. Because a lot of the writing process is just about discovery, and that's like the fun part. So just like being okay with that and like not knowing the path. Yeah, I think just remembering that kind of like that playfulness and fun about it, about writing. So yeah.
Right.
And Lee, what advice would you give?
What advice would I give? Oh God. For aspiring novelists?
Yeah, aspiring writer.
That's a good question. Jeez. I like how you played an Uno reverse card on me. I think I have very much the same advice, to trust the process. When I first started writing my book, I had this whole structure planned out for it. I thought it was going to be this sort of chapters that were linked thematically to a set of manicure steps. And I was so beholden to that structure because I thought it was so clever. I think the manuscript grew beyond that structure, and it took me a really long time to let the narrative just live. And when I finally let that structure go and let it do its own thing, a lot of magic happened. So yeah, trust the process and trust yourself. Would definitely be my advice. Thank you for that question. Okay, I think it's time to start the Q&A. So if anybody has questions for Akil.
Like so many questions.
Yeah. Don't be shy.
Yeah. Bye.
So we're talking the mascot. So like Half Gods was informed by like the political context of the Tamil War and the genocide. Would you say that there were political context that you drew on for this book in a similar way?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because like the text is a translation of like a Tamil text, and it does take. I don't identify any of the places in the book. It takes place, but like if you I give a name of the city. I call a place which would be Sri Lanka, the island. And then in the inner text, refugees are coming into Tamil Nadu, and it's into Rameswaram, which is like the tip of India. So there is this kind of awareness that you're not separate from this war, that this war is going to seep into your life, and these characters are living through a drought. So they're already struggling, and like what happens when you're already struggling, and there are people who are also really struggling, and what does that look like to care for someone when you're also in a very difficult situation? And there are also medical students, so they're trying to figure out a way. What does it mean to really help someone suffering, and what does that look like? And they have to create a new kind of system. So the war seeps into the book, and it is in conversation with the war that's happening. Yeah.
With the AI themes you're developing in the new book, how do you think about the AI themes you're developing relative to what exists in other science fiction that inspires you, or that you maybe wanted to talk about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think I had also read books that dealt with AI, and I think I was trying to think of it for example, like I'm not like a lot of books have like artificial intelligence that's almost like artificial intelligence like the kind of humanoid. That's like kind of like functioning like a human. So I think in some ways it's like which is like really like more far off. So I think in some ways I wanted the artificial intelligence to also feel somewhat like grounded to what is like capable like right now. So it's not saying like, oh yes, there are, you know, I'm talking about kind of narrow artificial intelligence, not like this general AI that's functioning like, you know, just like a human. So it's kind of, yeah, so I'm using that in also very specific way, talking about like natural language development. So kind of just, yeah, it's kind of, so it's really speaking about how narrow AI is functioning. So that's also speaking to in our own world, how narrow AIs are functioning in our own world. So I guess it's, in some ways, it's kind of grounded. The AI in the book is sort of grounded in today's world in a sense.
You mentioned that television is really important in the book. I was wondering if you were influenced by any TV shows or any movies in your writing process.
I feel like, yes, I must have, but I do also watch a lot of television. There's a lot of like, there's also something, in the characters in the book also, like they're watching this reality show about soldiers, and they, the main character and her cousin often just like spend time on the couch like watching TV. And, like just watching TV with other people is such like a communal ritual. And it's also like this way of, you know, being in community, being with people at the same time. It's like difficult sometimes to engage with people, like, you know, like somehow like the TV is this mediator where you can just like talk about what's happening on the screen, and it's like and exist together. So I feel like I must, yeah, I'm trying to think, what have I watched? I think I might have, like, yeah, I had watched Everything Everywhere recently, so it's not when I was writing the book, but I feel like that's also very like playing with time and dimensions. Yeah, but I was watching TV.
Hi, Akil. Who are your favorite authors to read, aside from Lee, obviously?
Yeah, yeah, my favorite authors to read. Oh, so many writers. Oh my God, this is always a question. Like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite? Like, name some names. I think I had mentioned like Yoko Tawada is great. Like Octavia Butler is great. I'm trying to think of like people who are like directly influenced. Ishmael Reed's great. Like I think also just people who just also like work that feels kind of polyphonic, like a lot of voices. I think I was trying to think about that too, like how these books that kind of have all these voices, and also maybe even like moving across different spaces and geographies and time periods. What else was I reading? It's hard because I'm trying to also time traveling back to that period when I was writing this book. And oh yeah, the movie I did watch. I watched Chungking Express. I feel like I rewatched it. I feel like it influenced me. Because it was also like these parallel stories that are happening that were sort of disconnected. And it also dealt with sort of love too. So I was kind of thinking about that. Yeah, time traveling. What was I reading? Yeah, I guess I'm trying to. Yeah. Also, I was reading Captain Lacey's work, and then Mieko Kawakami people. And also, I did read this book. It's called 20 by this Danish writer. It's called Workplace for the 22nd Century. Workplace employees in the 22nd century. Okay, something with employees in the 22nd century. So it takes place in the future, and it's great. It's basically interviews on a spaceship with the people on the spaceship, and it's so beautiful. She's a poet, and like the language is just like really like yeah, the language is just so it's like amazing. But yeah, it's just like interviews, and like you kind of through those interviews you kind of piece together what is happening on the spaceship, and it just that's like a really beautiful book. Yeah, you gotta read it. Where did you get your shirt?
Good question.
Good question. I got it. Where did I get it? I got it. I might have gotten it on Crossroads. Yeah. Pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, Akil has a
Segment,
killer
segment,
style.
okay.
Yeah.
Also, Lee, I wanted to ask you some questions too.
Oh no. Okay.
Because like both our books like deal a lot with memory.
Yeah.
And Lee, you wrote a memoir, and I just it was it was really beautiful, beautiful book. And also for one section of the book, for a long period of time, you couldn't see, you didn't have glasses. It was like a long chunk of your life that you visually couldn't see. I was so struck by like the sections in your book where you could actually see the details, or sort of like the details diminish. Like the writing becomes really sparse, and it kind of like imitates this kind of feeling of not being able to engage with the world and see the world. And how did you? I guess how did you go about thinking of going about writing the memory, or just even like thinking about your life when you couldn't see?
Yeah, I just want to preface. So I couldn't see for about 10 years of my life. My father, when I received a note to bring home to him that I needed glasses, he thought it was a government conspiracy to take away my eyesight because he suffers from PTSD. He was a former POW in the Vietnam War. And so I wasn't allowed to wear glasses for 10 years. So, I couldn't see the board when I was in school. I was a terrible student, as you can imagine. So it's a good question. When I first embarked on writing this memoir, one thing that I promised myself I wouldn't do was ask others for permission to tell my story. Because I didn't want anybody else's version of reality to taint my own. And so when I really committed to that, I realized that there were going to be things that I couldn't see, there were details that I couldn't make out, and I just thought, okay, well that's my version of reality, and let me just see how that plays out on the page. And the result is this really sparse writing, but hopefully it works.
Yeah, it was beautiful. But I feel like it was like such a cool move to make. Just think about how to give us that experience of not being able to see, from going from a period where you could see so much of the world, and suddenly there's this big transformation in your life, and then the sudden change, so that phase. So it was really, it was really amazing.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah. To ask questions to Lee too.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Anyway, yeah.
I hear you using the word chorus quite a lot, and I was wondering at an atomic level, what do you think is happening in these interactions in your book? And also, how do you play with that concept, concept of our bodies being an archive or memory? Do you have any thoughts on these?
The first thing you said was like a chorus?
Chorus.
Chorus, okay.
Chorus.
Chorus.
Ah,
okay. Okay. You say it one more time, sorry.
Were you using the word chorus or chorus?
Chorus.
Okay,
yeah.
right.
Yes.
So when you use the word chorus, do you have any insight onto what kind of exchange are you actually referring to when it comes to showing compassion to someone or having an interaction with someone? And then also, do you tie that back into our bodies being an archive, or are you reflecting on someone's death, or any of those?
That's a good question. And I think it's in two ways. The characters are trying to in our manuscript, they're trying to become more open to the pain of their patients, and that becomes something sort of unorthodox, and how they sort of start trying to practice that, and how they sort of try to incorporate the pain of other people. And also in thinking about in the future present storyline of how does someone really go and take someone else's pain, and how does someone else kind of accommodate someone else's suffering into their own life? So the characters are sort of forced into a situation where they make that choice, and it's sort of a simple act, but it seems like it has kind of consequences. So you're kind of thinking about where does where does this your body end, and also where does another body start, and how we're separate from each other, where this is kind of we are separate at the same time, we're kind of forced into spaces where we must interact, and and what does it look like when these characters actively are starting to just to kind of reach out in ways that seem unusual, and maybe like I mentioned before, you're jumping into the train tracks. You might, if you die, then people just think you're delirious. So that might have some sort of consequences. So where is that line? And these characters are really trying to like find that line, or also just like are crossing that line too. So just kind of playing in that space.
All right. Anyone else? No? All right, well, thank you so much, Akil. Yeah.